Core Issues Season 1 Chapter 1 Part 2 by Nicole. I would have taken the equipment from my lab and gone to the core to try hooking Frisk into the time machine to see if it'll work off the power of her determination. It won't work though. Frisk cocked her head to the side. Why not? Because the time machine is incapable of working. But we haven't seen any Sans who looked so willing to just off their Frisk either. Not even Red. He still killed her several times before he gave in. Frisk sighed. Let's get to the core. She took a step towards the door and stumbled with a groan. I caught her before she hit the floor and switched her weight onto my shoulder. Alphys jumped up. Is Frisk alright? Her frowned and picked her up bridal style. See, what's going on? A red glow burst to life on Frisk's shoulder, and a small hologram of Chara Dreamer looked up at me. She's okay. Just asleep. She hasn't slept in 48 hours. I rolled my eyes. Great. She likes to tell herself she did this all the time back in the day, and increasingly forgets that she doesn't have as much practice doing it nowadays. She also neglected to eat in the last 12 hours. So high maintenance. Alphys stared in wonder. A hologram? C turned to Alphys. Hello, Dr. Alphys. I am C, the artificial intelligence based off the memories of Chara Dreamer, the adopted human child of Toriel and Asgore Dreamer. Asriel made me shortly after Chara's death and implemented me into Frisk when she fell into the underground. Alphys blinked a few times and looked at me. That's not the story as I know it. I shrugged. It's different from universe to universe. Got a bed I can put her in? Oh yeah, there's plenty of beds below. She opened the door to the elevator and took us into the Drew lab. I slipped Frisk's pack off her back and put her on a bed. As gently as I could, I moved her hands to clasp over her stomach. I must have been watching her sleep for a while because Alphys coughed nervously behind me. I turned and smiled, scratching the back of my head. Sigh, spaced out there. Alphys grabbed my hand and adjusted her glasses while looking at it. You are nothing like the Sans I know. I straightened up and took my hand back. Not in the least. I sat down on the bed so I would be eye level with her. What do you want to know? Ask away. She looked at my Frisk and back to me. How does she have such a high love and still be so caring? Yeah, it's pretty high up there, huh? I smiled and looked up, remembering. Frisk was an adult when she fell. She's former military, but if you ask her about it, she'll dodge any questions about what her service entailed. She's genuinely sweet and caring, with a high tolerance for bullshit. But when she's made up her mind about something that must be done, there is very little you can do to stop her. Alphys frowned. What's your story? I eyed her for a moment and sighed. The Sans and Papyrus you know are the sons of your predecessor, W.D. Gaster. Me and my Papyrus are W.D. Gaster. When he fell into the core, he split into two beings. We both exist as two halves of the same whole that have become, over time, completely distinct and separate individuals. I held up my right hand, staring at the whole. I remember all of the research, but I have none of the drive to pursue it. Papyrus remembers nothing, but has all of our collective drive and enthusiasm. I smiled wryly, hand falling to my jacket pocket. I had worked so hard for so long to put us back into one piece that I hadn't realized we'd become two different people until Frisk pointed it out to us. You mentioned a time machine. I didn't know Sans had a time machine. Every Sans has a time machine, and each and every one of us builds it in hopes of returning to the past and fixing it. It never works. You're awfully free with this information, she observed. I gave her a wry smile. You won't be remembering it after the reset. Alphys' eyes narrowed and she wiggled her nose. What is your universe's history? Chara Dreamer was the first human to fall. He was a good, happy child. He loved his family very dearly, and hoped one day to find a way to bring down the barrier. He died after a long battle with cancer. Toriel absorbed his soul and passed through the barrier in order to take him home. She was attacked by the humans there, but did not retaliate. She held on long enough to lay Chara to rest among the flowers he dearly loved so much, and came back to the barrier to die on the throne room floor. Alphys covered her mouth with her hands. "Your Tori is dead?" I nodded. Asgore declared war on humanity, and Azrael took his mother's dust and left, going to live in the ruins. The story from there is very similar to your own. 6 human children fall and attempt to make it through the underground, dying along the way. And then Frisk fell. I sighed. Like I said before, Frisk was an adult when she fell, and the fall nearly killed her. When Azrael found her, he repaired the damage, but her high love prompted him to include his own measures of insurance against harm. He wasn't going to let her die, but he wasn't going to let her hurt anyone else, so he installed C into her head. He told me later he was rather gratified to find out that her love was not an indication of her willingness to hurt others. She'd gone up to Mount Ebbet to investigate reports of missing children for her employer. When I first saw her, I panicked. I'd never seen a love that high before in anyone. I warned Paps to stay away from her, but he went to capture her for Undyne anyways. When I caught up to them, I found her laughing so hard she was literally rolling around on the ground. After Paps spared her, I asked her why she didn't kill him, and she looked at me like I had grown a second head. She said, "Why on earth would I do such a thing? Your brother is the biggest cinnamon roll I've ever met." Alphys giggled. "Hey, you want something to drink? I've got ketchup." I leaned back and put my hands behind my head. I'm a hot sauce kind of guy. Alphys stood. "I've got a bottle of that too. Undyne like to use it for..." She trailed off and started crying. I stood up and hugged her. "It's okay. We can figure out what's wrong and set everything right. You won't even remember any of this ever happened. It will disappear like a bad dream, and you'll be back at the beach soaking up some sun with Undyne and Frisk before you know it." Alphys sniffed. "You mean it?" I nodded. "We've gotten pretty good at fixing these kinds of things." "I'll go get that hot sauce." She headed off, tears still in her eyes. I sat down on the bed across from Frisk and put my feet up. The GB landed on my lap and snuggled in, the lights in its eyes fading to a dull glow. I figured a few winks wouldn't kill me and fell asleep. I woke to a hard, painful crack from being thrown into a wall. I bit back a scream and looked for the idiot who needed to have a bad time. Dread consumed me when I realized I wasn't in the true lab. I was in the lowest basement level of the core. I saw the back of Sand's blue hoodie as the door shut and the lock clicked. Alphys was cowering in the corner. I'm sorry. He said he wouldn't hurt Mettaton if I turned you over to him." She curled into a ball and sobbed in the corner. "Oh, Alphys," I said, feeling the rift opening inside of me. "You're not as sorry as you're going to be." The power of the core crawled through every part of my being. A female lizard monster stared up at me with undisguised horror. Fascinating. She looks like an assistant, but not one I recognize. Nevertheless, my office was a complete mess. Files were everywhere, like someone had thrown a fit in the room. Very unbecoming. "Assistant, why is my office in shambles?" The lizard woman shook her head like she didn't understand what I said. Ah, she was new then. Understandable. A light sparked in her eyes and she grabbed my hand. "Dr. Gaster, there's an intruder in the core. He's hooked a human child up to a machine in the energy unit." I smelled a lie, but it did explain the mess. A human child? The only human child in the underground was Prince Chara. I grabbed her arm. "Come with me." There was a crackling hiss from my collar. I was wearing the most unusual jacket. I quite liked it, though it wasn't very practical for my work. A voice came through. "Bones, where are you?" A thrum went up my spine, a very pleasurable sensation, dark and warm. Well, this voice. The lizard woman stood on the tips of her toes to speak into the tiny receiver. "Bones isn't here right now." Great, just great. Every time we go to the core basement. The voice huffed. Who's this? I asked. Your favorite test subject. Oh, she understood me. Very interesting. Listen, Dr. Gaston, there's a short skeleton monster in a blue hoodie in the core. He's hooked a young girl and myself into a broken time machine in the energy unit. I can get the both of us out, but I can't counteract the skeleton's blue magic if he comes back. So the faster you get over here, the sooner we can get this mess cleaned up, and back to your experiments. We shall be there shortly. Disabling the door lock, I strode out of the office, the assistant on my heels. We reached the energy unit without running into the intruder. An adult human woman was helping an injured human girl out of a machine she'd been hooked into. I knew without understanding why that the woman was the owner of the voice I had found so enjoyable. She was wearing the same curious jacket I was wearing. I found that uniquely satisfying. She held the girl in her arms gently, like a mother holding a child. The scene was pleasing in a distinct way. When she turned towards me, I reached out and touched her face, and she accepted my touch as if it was a completely normal gesture. She smiled warmly at me and passed the girl into my arm. Lightning quick, she grabbed the assistant by the throat and lifted her with one hand. An intensely strong female, very well trained, expression quite terrifying. Such a seemingly large contradiction from just moments ago. See, you have 30 seconds to explain to me why I shouldn't beat the crap out of Alphys. I know I passed out on my own from exhaustion, but that doesn't explain why I'm now in the core. A red hologram flared to life on her shoulder, taking the shape of Prince Chara. Very interesting. When Alphys went to find the hot sauce for Bones, she ran into her Sans, who threatened to kill Metaton if the two of you weren't turned over. She dropped the lizard woman. Alphys wasn't, to the floor. So typical. I was worried the portal would cost us, and it seemed it has. She groaned and rubbed her forehead. Just find my equipment bag. Alphys ran off. The woman turned to me and smiled at the girl in my arms. She pushed the girl's hair out from her face, and the resemblance was uncanny. This is you. No, I corrected. This is a version of you. She looked at me. Correct, Doctor. I shifted the girl to one arm and took the woman's hand in mine. You said you were my favorite test subject, but I don't remember such a fascinating individual. If you would be so kind as to relieve me of my confusion, I would be very happy to explore how you would be a favorite of mine. I lifted a hand to my face, nuzzling her fingers. The hologram of Prince Chara threw his hands up in the air. Why does he always hit on you when he's like this? The woman sighed, and the warm smile she gave me made my knees a bit weak. So very interesting that a complete stranger had this effect on me. Then again, I had never been anything but entirely honest and forward with my feelings. I would make for a poor scientist if I were not. Because he isn't afraid of my rejection like this. She pulled her hand from mine slowly, letting the tips of her finger gently graze my chin. I'm Frisk, and the way you are now, we haven't met yet. Well, not in this universe. You seemed only able to remember me in our own timeline, and not in any other. The way I am now, an interesting way to phrase it, don't you think? I can tell I am not exactly myself. I am too short. I am dressed inappropriately for lab work of any kind. A strange person is using my greatest creation for his own purpose, and I am rather inspired by the presence of a human woman that I have no memory of. But instinct tells me that I should simply follow your lead. Tell me more about this girl. She's a version of me. She's the key to breaking the barrier, and she desperately needs our help. Can she really break the barrier? She already has, but something has gone wrong. When she comes around, I'll be able to find out what happened to her to get her in so much trouble. Alphys came back into the room with the backpack. I found it, but it looks like Sans was digging through it. Frisk nodded and looked through the bag. Not surprising, she emptied her unusual array of things from the bag. Finding smelling salts and a piece of monster candy, she revived the girl and fed her the candy. Hostile coming down the hallway, the hologram said. Of course.